In this video, I'd like to talk about chapter 2 of the book by E.H. Gombrich called A Little History of the World. Chapter 2 is when his actual discussion of history begins, as opposed to just talking about kind of the theory of history and looking back and how we do that in chapter 1. Chapter 2 is called The Greatest Inventors of All Time, and it speaks about what we call prehistory, the time before exact dates are known. So this is the time where we only really know the kind of roughly when things happened, and we have to talk in terms of date ranges, which are usually in the millions or thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. We can't say exactly this happened on this day and at this date. So that's prehistory, and there are a few key dates which I think are good. There aren't very many dates mentioned in this chapter, but there are a few which may be helpful reference points. There's 210,000 years ago, which is roughly when the Neanderthal people, the Neanderthal species, appeared. Then there's 150,000 years ago when our ancestors started using stone tools, and there's around 4,000 years ago when humans discovered metal. So those are three dates which are mentioned, but as I just said, this is about prehistory, so all the dates are very rough and we don't really know them. So the chapter starts by talking about two famous discoveries, both made in Germany, of human remains, or remains of people, remains which look like they were human. There's one which was discovered near Heidelberg in Germany called the Heidelberg jaw, and it was a jaw which was really big and looked like it had very big teeth, so it looked like a very, very powerful jaw. And then there's also one which was discovered in the Neander Valley in Germany, which was a skull, which looked like a person, but it didn't have a forehead. It just had two ridges above the eyebrows, or where the eyebrows would be. And so people thought that, okay, we usually associate this part with the brain, with thinking, and so this skull didn't have forehead, didn't have this area of the skull, and so it probably didn't do as much thinking as we do. That was the theory. So where do we go from here? Well, much of the chapter is a discussion of all the inventions which these people, these different species, the Neanderthals and our distant ancestors, must have come up with. And he discusses these because he says that by the time that history begins, where people are writing, using writing and having dates, and we can date up to the day or maybe the year when things happened. At that point, people had lots of things. They had huts, they had tools, they had bread, they had domesticated animals, they have all these rather sophisticated things. And so he asked the question, so the people who came before these people, before history, the prehistoric people, must have invented these things at some point. And he goes through a long list, which I think starts with, say, fire, creating fire. And if you've ever tried to create fire on your own without some matches, you'll know how very hard that is to do. You have to rub sticks in a very special technique together to create some fire. And then cooking, the idea that if you place some of your raw meat, which took you ages to chew through, in the fire and roasted it for a bit, then it would actually be much easier to chew and easier and a greater source of energy. Then there are things like planting seeds to grow grasses, and then taking the grains of those seeds and smashing them together and creating breads. Then there's things like metals, which were created by holding certain stones into fire, and then I think the first metal to be discovered was copper, when the stone melted and it solidified into copper, which was hard, but it's softer than stone. But some genius discovered that if you added a bit of tin, then it created bronze, and then you've got the Bronze Age, and other things like the domestication of animals and cows and dogs. So you have a stable food supply and a bit of companionship from the dogs, and then clay pots and paintings on the sides of walls. So all of these wonderful things which we can be very grateful to our ancestors for discovering.